Now this one might get a little controversial to say the least, but just to nip the silly people in the bud, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Rhodesia was a paradise. But what we are going to do is talk about an interesting part of history that's often overlooked and forgotten because, well, politics got in the way. Welcome back to 5 Minute History, the weekly series where patrons choose the topic. This time we're going to be discussing the Rhodesian Armoured Corps, its establishment, and how it came to operate T-55 tanks when it was very much on the opposite side of the Cold War to the USSR. The Rhodesian Armoured Corps, sometimes nicknamed the Black Devils, was the primary armoured formation of the Rhodesian Security Forces, or Rhodesian Army, and its history spans two distinct periods, really across two separate entities by the name of Rhodesia. Over the course of its existence, the Corps evolved immensely, beginning in World War II as a force raised from the Crown Colony of Southern Rhodesia to a completely independent unit as a part of the RSF. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. See, back in 1941, colonial authorities in southern Rhodesia established the Southern Rhodesian Reconnaissance Unit, say that 10 times quickly, to support the British Empire's war effort. The territory was not too heavily populated though, and because of that, this new unit was integrated into South Africa's 6th Armoured Division. It then saw action in the Mediterranean theatre, including participation in the Italian campaign and the liberation of Florence in 1944, as part of the Allied campaign in Italy. After World War II, the regiment continued in various armoured car roles, equipped with vehicles such as the American Staghound and the South African Marmon Harrington armoured car, until finally it was disbanded in 1956. That should have been it. The video should have ended there, but, and I am skipping through a lot of events here, the territory of Southern Rhodesia, absolutely horrified at the British government's planet majority rule for independence, declared independence itself on the 11th of November 1965. This was actually the first time a British territory had declared independence since 1776. You may have heard of that once or twice in recent years about what country that was. Now, the Southern Rhodesian Territory, having largely been self-governed since 1923, had a fair share of problems though, and this included two major groups, namely ZANU and ZAPU. Both communist, both extremely anti-Rhodesia, and well, like all Luigi-Waluigi moments, viciously at odds with one another. As independence came around, these groups, one armed by China and one by the USSR, started their insurgency, triggering the Bush War or the Second Chimurenga, depending on who you ask what it's called. The Corps was reactivated in response to the Bush War, and as the conflict intensified throughout the 1970s, the unit was reformed as the Rhodesian Armoured Car, or RHACR Regiment, before being later redesignated as the Rhodesian Armoured Corps, or the RAC. Its base of operations was Blackiston Houston Barracks near the capital of Salisbury, modern-day Harare, and it drew personnel from both regular army and territorial reserve units. The organisational structure of the Corps reflected a combined arms philosophy, and it adapted to southern African conditions. Squadrons were company-sized units, and they were composed of multiple troops surrounded by signals, logistics and training detachments. By the late 1970s, the Corps was typically organised into 5 squadrons, and each was capable of independent action across Rhodesia. The idea and the modular structure allowed the units to conduct reconnaissance and escort duties and conventional combat operations at relatively short notice, and obviously not as an entire unit, as, well, 5 smaller parts. Unlike other wars and units with the title Armoured though, Rhodesian doctrine favoured wheeled armoured vehicles, which possessed significant operational range and required less logistical support than tracked tanks. Among these were the South African-built Eland armoured car, see the pinned comment for a video with more information from the channel Hobambles on that, and variants of the French Panhard AML equipped with 90mm guns capable of engaging heavier armour. Not kidding, by the way. If you want to learn more about African equipment, Hobambles, one of my best friends, he covers it way better than I ever will because that's his niche thing. The Corps also employed Ferret scout cars and a variety of improvised and locally modified vehicles, such as the MAP series armoured personnel carriers, designed to contend with the constant threat of mines and ambush from guerrilla forces. The Corps would often operate in support of infantry formations, providing rapid reaction capabilities to disrupt guerrilla movements and secure contested terrain. See, when I say guerrillas, don't mistake them for under-equipped bush gangs. Oh no, not at all. Rhodesian forces would increasingly face threats from far better equipped conventional units, and using neighbouring countries such as Zambia and Mozambique as bases. These units would even field Soviet-supplied armoured vehicles. The Corps would do its best to adapt, be it by training or conventional engagements, or restructuring its squadrons to meet new threats. One of the most notable engagements involving the Corps was Operation Miracle in late 1979. This offensive targeted a large insurgent base near Chimoio in Mozambique, and involved coordinated actions by elements of the Rhodesian Army, the Selous Scouts, the Rhodesian Light Infantry, and the Rhodesian SAS. along with armoured support from the unit we have been discussing. Despite heavy opposition, the Rhodesian military and armoured corps prevailed, wiping out hundreds of insurgents for the loss of just 8 men and 3 aircraft. Later in the conflict, the Rhodesian military broke with tradition when it acquired a small number of Polish-built T-55LD main battle tanks through the South African interception of an arms shipment. It's actually kind of funny how this all occurs and very, very interesting. See, back in October 1979, South African authorities seized the French freighter Astor, suspected of carrying weapons to Angola. The ship had originally been chartered by Libya to transport 10 Polish-built T-55LDs, along with their ammunition and some spare parts, from Tripoli to Uganda via Mombasa, but after Uganda lost the Uganda-Tanzania war, the cargo was redirected to an unknown Angolan port. Then all of a sudden, the Astor came back into South African waters, where it was quickly impounded in Durban, and South Africa turned around and yoinked all the tanks, citing its own conflict with Angola. The South Africans kept 2 for evaluation and testing against their own Olifants, Roycats and Ratels, etc., and the remaining 8 tanks were put on trucks and driven up the road given to the Rhodesian army and assigned to the newly formed E Squadron Rhodesian Armoured Corps. To mask their origin, officials falsely claimed the tanks had been captured in Mozambique and publicly moved them around the country to exaggerate Rhodesia's armoured strength that it had, dozens of tanks, not just 8. South African crews trained Rhodesian personnel and modified the tanks with improved communications, anti-infrared paint, etc., but they were never deployed operationally as minority rule ended shortly after with the dissolution of Rhodesia and the establishment of Zimbabwe. The Rhodesian Armoured Corps itself would be superseded by the newly formed Zimbabwe Armoured Corps between 1980 and 81, and its traditions and some of its personnel were nominally absorbed into the post-independence National Army, but the identity of the unit was extremely different to what it used to be. But that's the story of the Rhodesian Armoured Corps, a unit that began life as a small recon force and evolved into a counterinsurgency reaction force armed with fast-moving wheeled vehicles, and for a brief time, Soviet MBTs. As for those T-55s though, it is possible that the Zimbabweans still have them, the original ones that is, but the information on their status and whether or not they actually work is pretty hard to find, as somebody with my skin tone halfway around the world is not really going to open up many questions from the Zimbabwean government. Sadly as well, any people I could contact within the country too would be putting themselves at risk if they ask too much, because after all, it is a dictatorship. You don't want to, send your friends out and put them in danger for a silly YouTube video. But what is interesting is that future Zimbabwean procurement could be going towards new Chinese tanks such as the VT series. So, maybe we'll get a video on that in the future. Thank you again, patrons, for your support and the suggestion on the topic. Behave yourself in the comments, like, comment, subscribe, and let me know if you want more content on Rhodesia from somebody who's not going to sit here and, do the whole booty short suck off the entire time, because I do find it quite interesting, to be honest. So yeah, by all means, let me know if, romanticist style history on the country would interest you. I'd be more than happy to cover it. And yes, I am still working on a very long video about the country. It's just, look, one day we'll do Rhodesian Month. It's just going to take me a long time to get that written in a way that's not going to really upset YouTube and also tell the story correctly.